God, I just want a dad for mommy, a little girl whispered in church. But a millionaire was listening. It was Christmas Eve in the sleepy town of Maple Ridge, and snow was falling like powdered sugar over rooftops and bare tree branches. Inside the dimly lit First Grace Church, flickering candlelight bounced gently off stained glass windows. The choir hummed, Silent Night Soft and reverent, echoing off the wooden rafters. In the back pew, a man sat alone, tall, well-dressed, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that held the dull sheen of sorrow. His name was Jackson Cole, a name whispered in business circles and splashed across magazines years ago. Once hailed as a real estate prodigy, Jackson had stepped back from it all after the death of his mother, a quiet, gentle woman who had once loved this very church. He hadn't come for the hymns or the candles tonight. He came because it was the only place that didn't feel hollow, the only place that didn't echo with the lonely silence of a penthouse too big for one man. As the final verse of the hymn began, a sound broke through the stillness, not from the choir, but from the front of the church. A child's voice, barely louder than a whisper, but piercing enough to draw breath from the room. God, I don't need toys. I just want a dad for my mom. She's real tired all the time. Jackson's eyes flicked toward the altar. A little girl no older than 5 knelt beside her mother. Her small hands were pressed tightly together, and her eyes were squeezed shut in fierce concentration. Not for me, she added, still whispering. She cries at night. She thinks I don't hear her. There was no drama in her voice, no plea for sympathy, just the raw honesty of a child who loved her mother more than anything else in the world. The choir faltered. The organ player hesitated, and for one impossible moment it seemed the entire church, every person, every light, every breath, stood still. Jackson sat frozen. The mother sitting beside the little girl gently rested a hand on her back. She looked worn, her coat frayed at the sleeves, her scarf a bit too thin for the winter cold. But her hand was steady, and her touch was tender. He didn't know them, didn't even know their names. But something shifted inside him, something small and quiet, like the moment just before the first snowflake falls. The girl's voice had done something no headline, no boardroom, no tragedy had been able to do. It cracked him open. As the final candle was extinguished and the service drew to a close, Jackson watched from the shadows as the mother stood gently taking her daughter's hand. They left before the final hymn began. No coats lined with fur, no shiny boots, no family waiting outside with cocoa and warm hugs. Just the two of them. Just survival. The little girl giggled as they stepped into the snow, catching a flake on her tongue. Her mom smiled faintly like someone remembering how. They walked into the night hand in hand. Jackson didn't follow, but he couldn't look away. He stayed in the empty church long after the candles were out and the lights dimmed, the girl's voice echoing in his mind again and again. Please, God, just a dad. Not for me, for my mom. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, something like purpose whispered through the grief. Jackson Cole couldn't sleep that night. He returned to his sprawling, sterile condo in downtown Chicago, the kind of place filled with sleek countertops and lifeless silence. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the city glittering like a million distant stars. But his mind was still in that little church, with that voice, not a prayer for toys, not a plea for snow. Just 5 quiet words. I just want a dad. And not even for herself. That little girl with tangled hair and a coat 2 sizes too big had asked the universe for something no child should ever feel they have to ask for. Someone to help her mom smile again. Jackson hadn't felt this way in years. After losing his mother that past October, he'd retreated. From friends, from the boardroom, from life. She had been his compass, his anchor. It was her voice that used to guide him, telling him Jack, kindness doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. That night, he finally understood what she meant. The next morning, he couldn't shake it. He canceled meetings, ignored calls, pushed aside emails from investors. Instead, he made a single phone call to a trusted friend, Karen Fields, a social worker he'd once supported through a community housing project. Karen was discreet, empathetic, and connected. He didn't ask for personal records, just a simple question. Is there a mother and daughter in Maple Ridge possibly in need of help? The daughter might be around 5, and I believe their last name is Reed. The pastor mentioned it softly. Karen promised to be careful. Jackson trusted her. Later that afternoon, she called back. Her voice was gentle. Their names are Maggie and Ava Reed. Jackson closed his eyes. Ava. The name suited her. Karen continued. They live in an older apartment complex off Jefferson Street. It's not in great shape. Maggie's a widow. Her husband died in a highway collision 3 years ago. He was coming home from his second shift at a packaging plant. Maggie's been doing everything she can since diner work, cleaning jobs, odd shifts. No family nearby. Jackson sat down, absorbing it. Are they okay? Karen paused. They're surviving, but not thriving. Maggie doesn't ask for help. She's proud. And Ava. That little girl walks around like she's 10 years older than she is. Jackson thanked her quietly. That evening, he found himself parked on Jefferson Street in a car that didn't belong there. Sleek black, too polished. He kept the engine running hidden under the shadow of a rusting fire escape. And there they were. Coming home, Maggie clutching a bag of groceries that looked painfully light. Ava holding her mom's hand, chatting about something with a kind of sparkle that felt both precious and rare. They looked tired, but they looked like a team. Jackson felt something shift again. Not pity, recognition. This woman was trying with everything she had, not asking for a handout, not complaining, just enduring. And the little girl still smiling. The next morning, a contractor showed up at Maggie's building, said he was there for a free inspection sponsored by a winter outreach program. By the end of the day, the worst roof leaks were patched. 2 nights later, a grocery bag appeared on her doorstep. Fresh fruit, milk, eggs, warm bread. There was no note. Then came a cozy wool blanket. No name, no explanation. But Maggie noticed, so did Ava. She danced barefoot around the living room, holding the blanket over her shoulders like a cape. Jackson watched from his car. He never approached, never knocked. He just showed up quietly, like someone trying to be part of something without breaking it. On New Year's Eve, he gave into a small impulse. He placed a bottle of milk and a bouquet of simple winter flowers on their welcome mat. Tucked inside was a card that read, "Only someone up there cares about you." He left before dawn, but later that morning, Maggie opened her door and found the gifts. Ava squealed with joy. "Mommy, look, maybe it was an angel." Maggie's brow furrowed as she read the card lips parting in confusion. Who would? But Ava clapped her hands and said, "It's him. The angel I prayed to at church." Maggie smiled, but not with certainty. Still, she placed the flowers in a chipped coffee mug on the windowsill. Ava drank the milk like it was gold. Across the street behind tinted glass, Jackson Cole allowed himself to smile for the first time in months. His life had once been about boardrooms, skyscrapers, and bottom lines. Now, it was about a little girl with a prayer, and the woman doing everything she could to answer it. Winter deepened in Maple Ridge. The sidewalks grew icier, the wind sharper, but for Maggie Reed and her daughter Ava, something had begun to shift. Just beneath the surface of their daily struggle, the roof no longer dripped on stormy nights. The heater, which had once groaned like a dying animal, now hummed gently. Fresh groceries, simple, nourishing, and anonymous, kept appearing every few days like small, quiet miracles. And with every delivery, a sense of something Ava couldn't quite name began blooming in her heart. "Mommy," she said one morning, cradling a perfectly red apple, "I think angels leave snacks now." Maggie tried to smile, though suspicion flickered behind her tired eyes. She checked for notes, cameras, some kind of clue. Nothing. Just generosity cloaked in silence. Across town, Jackson Cole was learning the rhythm of their lives from a careful distance. Each morning before sunrise, he would check in with a contact at a local bakery, then anonymously prepay for a fresh bag of bread, a jug of milk, and occasionally small treats for Ava. On Fridays, a local handyman, on Jackson's quiet payroll, would inspect the building again, always finding just enough work to subtly improve their living conditions. Jackson wasn't sure what he was doing exactly. This wasn't a business deal. There were no outcomes to measure, no returns to expect. But the more he gave, the more he felt human again. One day from his car parked a half block away, he saw Ava helping an elderly woman carry laundry up the stairs. Her coat sleeves were still too long, and her backpack looked like it had been passed down 3 times before her. But she smiled like she'd never known anything was missing. Another morning, he watched Maggie step out of the building, her arms full of flyers she would spend the afternoon handing out in the freezing cold. She paused at the curb when she noticed an old man struggling to shovel snow from his steps. She didn't hesitate. She set her work aside and picked up the shovel. 10 minutes later, his steps were clear. She walked away with red cheeks and frozen fingers, saying nothing. Jackson sat in stunned silence, the image of his late mother flashing through his mind. How she used to kneel in her garden every spring, planting beauty where no one else thought to. Real kindness, his mother had once said, doesn't announce itself. It just does. Later that week, Jackson returned to Jefferson Street with something small but heartfelt, a brand new pair of snow boots for Ava and a bright pink scarf Maggie could never afford on her own. He placed them gently beside their door, tucked with a tiny handwritten card, a little warmth for the people who warm others. He didn't knock, but this time he didn't leave either. From the shadows of his car, he watched Ava open the door and shriek with glee. Mommy, pink boots, real ones. Maggie stepped out slowly, holding the scarf. She scanned the street, empty, still, just snow drifting under the glow of old street lamps. Who keeps doing this? She whispered. I told you, Ava said, twirling. It's the angel. That night, Jackson sat on the edge of his hotel bed. He hadn't been able to go back to the city, and stared at his phone. He typed out a message, deleted it, typed again. Would it be wrong to want to meet them? He never sent it. The following week, Maggie collapsed at work. She'd been running herself into the ground, double shifts, late nights, skipping meals. A concerned coworker called an ambulance, and Ava spent a night with their upstairs neighbor, not fully understanding why her mom wasn't home yet. When Maggie woke in the hospital, a nurse handed her an envelope. Your bill, she said softly, was paid in full. Anonymous donor, inside a small note. Merry Christmas. You matter more than you know. Maggie's fingers trembled, her eyes welled with tears. Who was doing this, and why? The mystery began to press harder. At the bookstore where Maggie picked up weekend shifts, a coworker gasped one afternoon. Hey, isn't this the guy you chatted with at the gas station last week? She turned the phone toward Maggie. It was a business magazine article. Headline, Reclusive Real Estate. Tycoon Jackson Cole returns to roots amid rumors of new foundation. Her stomach dropped. Her eyes scanned the screen. His face too polished in the photo, but unmistakable. The man she'd run into, twice the one Ava had nicknamed Mr. Snow Boots, the one who had made her laugh in the checkout line. It was him. Her face went pale. The deliveries, the boots, the hospital bill, the card, the roof, everything. It wasn't magic, it was money, his money. Maggie left work early, barely registering the snow falling around her, as she walked home in a daze. Ava was sitting by the window, drawing Mr. Buttons the teddy bear again. Mommy, she said, Mr. Christmas left another note. He said he likes my art. Maggie knelt beside her. Ava, Mr. Christmas has a real name. His name is Jackson, and he's not just a nice man, he's someone important, someone with a lot of money, and he's been helping us. Ava tilted her head. But he helped us because we needed help, right? Maggie stared at her, speechless. That night, as Ava slept, Maggie bundled into her coat and scarf and walked through the snow toward the diner, because she knew he'd be there. The diner sat on the corner of Cedar and Main, its neon sign flickering against the snow-covered sidewalk like a heartbeat. Inside, the warmth of clinking mugs and soft jazz offered shelter from the biting wind. Jackson Cole sat in his usual booth near the back, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him, untouched. He knew she'd come. He didn't know how he knew, but the weight in his chest told him she would. And then, like a pause in a song, Maggie Reed walked in. Her coat was still damp from the snow scarf wrapped tight around her neck, face flushed with something colder than the wind outside. Betrayal. Jackson stood as she approached, his voice quiet. Maggie. She didn't let him speak further. You lied to me, she said flatly. All this time, it was you. He winced but nodded. Yes. But I didn't mean to deceive you. You watched me struggle. She cut in, her voice shaking. You let me struggle. And then you showed up like some silent savior, dropping gifts at my door like we were a project. His chest tightened. That's not what this was. Isn't it? She snapped, eyes glassy with restrained tears. You're Jackson Cole, real estate empire, featured in magazines, a man who could have helped with a single call. But instead, you played guardian angel like we were part of a, what, charity experiment. He was silent for a moment. Then, you're right. I could have come forward. I should have. But I wasn't doing this for recognition. I wasn't even sure why I was doing it at first. All I knew is, I saw something in you I couldn't walk away from. Maggie crossed her arms. Pity. No, he said gently, shaking his head. Admiration. That stopped her. I saw you shovel a stranger's walkway when your fingers were frozen. I saw you give your daughter joy when you could barely afford to feed her. I saw you hold her hand like it was the only thing keeping you grounded. You didn't ask for help. You didn't expect it. But you gave so much without ever receiving in return. And that moved me more than any business deal ever could. Maggie's arms dropped slowly to her sides. I didn't want you to feel small, Jackson continued. I wanted to support you, but not embarrass you. And the truth is, I didn't know how to step into your world without disrupting it. Maggie stared at the floor, her anger softening under the weight of something heavier. The vulnerability of being seen. You made me feel like a case study, she whispered. Like I was the headline in someone else's redemption arc. He stepped forward gently. You're not a story I'm trying to fix. You're someone I'm trying to know. She looked up, eyes full of everything she'd kept locked inside. The fear, the fatigue, the hope she couldn't admit out loud. I don't need a rich man with a hero complex, she said quietly. I'm not offering that, he replied. I'm offering to stand beside you. Not above you. Not in front of you. Beside you. Maggie's breath caught. The door behind them creaked. They turned. And there stood Ava, barefoot in her pajamas, coat barely zipped, clutching her teddy bear with wide, worried eyes. Are you mad at Mommy? She asked. Jackson dropped to one knee instantly at her level. No, sweetheart. I could never be mad at your mommy. Ava blinked. She's just scared. Jackson nodded. I know. When people help us, she gets scared. They'll leave, Ava added, hugging Mr. Buttons tighter. Jackson's eyes welled up. He turned to Maggie. I'm not going anywhere. She didn't speak. Couldn't, but her heart shifted. Just a little. Not enough to leap, but enough to lean in. They left the diner together, Ava cradled in Maggie's arms. As they walked into the snowy night, Jackson didn't try to hold her hand. He simply walked a step behind, letting her lead. Because trust wasn't asked for, it was earned. And tonight he'd earned just enough to hope. Snow blanketed the rooftops of Maple Ridge like a memory soft and cold and impossible to ignore. The days that followed were quiet, not distant, but cautious. Maggie didn't shut Jackson out entirely. She still answered when he texted, still nodded when their paths crossed in the grocery store. But there was hesitation in her eyes, like someone afraid to put weight on a bridge that had once broken beneath her. And Jackson didn't push. Instead, he waited. Waited while Maggie tested the idea of trusting someone again. Waited while Ava, bright as ever, continued to wrap herself around his presence like ivy to a fence post. Mr. Snowboots, she called him now, a nickname that clung like glitter. You're my favorite grown-up, who's not mommy. One afternoon, Jackson spotted them outside the local library. Ava ran to hug him, while Maggie lagged behind, arms crossed, wary. He offered to carry their books. She declined, but didn't walk away. Progress. Then came the day Ava called him something else. They were all sitting in the park wrapped in scarves and drinking cocoa from paper cups. Ava had just finished retelling a story about Mr. Button's imaginary adventure across the Arctic. And then Mr. Buttons got a cape, and then, oh, look what I drew you. She handed Jackson a crumpled paper with 3 stick figures, a little girl with yellow hair, a tall man with dark shoes, and a woman with a purple scarf. Above them, a heart and the word family. Jackson felt his chest tighten. Ava beamed. That's you, Daddy. Silence. The world didn't stop spinning, but in Jackson's heart, everything paused. Maggie stiffened beside him. Her hand hovered mid-sip, her eyes locked on Ava. Jackson's breath caught. He knelt gently. Hey, kiddo. I didn't tell you to call me that. Ava shrugged, completely at ease. I know. I just feel it. Maggie said nothing. But that night, as they stood at her doorstep, Jackson turned to her quietly. I'm not trying to replace anyone, he said. But I would stay. For her. For you. If you'd let me. Maggie didn't answer. Not with words. But she didn't close the door either. The next week, Maggie invited him in. Dinner was simple. Chicken noodle soup, toast and laughter. Ava insisted on setting the table. Jackson helped with dishes. And for the first time it felt like life, not a visit, not charity, not fear. Later that evening, Ava curled up on the couch between them, wrapped in a blanket Mr. Buttons tucked under her arm. She dozed off mid-story cocoa, still on her lips. Jackson noticed the teddy bear's seams coming undone, the left eye dangling by a thread. He reached out to touch it. "She's had that bear since she was 1, Maggie whispered. "I've sewn it up more times than I can count." He nodded, saying nothing. That night, after they carried Ava to bed, Jackson stayed behind. When Maggie returned from brushing her teeth, she found him sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, sewing kit in hand. Mr. Buttons sat in his lap, newly stitched seams, reinforced, and a small lavender ribbon tied around his neck. The same color as Ava's favorite scarf. Maggie blinked. "You fixed him." Jackson smiled. Maybe he just needed a little rest. Her lips parted. Something caught between a smile and a breath she didn't realize she was holding. But the next night, life reminded them of its unpredictability. It started with a cry. Ava's fever hit fast and hard. Burning cheeks, glassy eyes, shallow breaths. Maggie panicked, rushing to her room. Jackson was right behind her. He pressed a hand to Ava's forehead and whispered, "We need to cool her down. I'll grab towels." For hours they traded shifts, sponging her down, whispering stories, praying without speaking. Around midnight, Ava stirred, her voice barely audible. "Daddy?" Jackson leaned closer. "I'm here," he whispered. "Daddy's here if you want me to be." She clutched Mr. Buttons tighter and drifted back to sleep. At the doorway, Maggie stood, frozen hand over her heart. She had heard it all. When Jackson stepped out to fetch more water, she stopped him in the hallway. "She called you Daddy," she whispered. He nodded. "And you stayed?" "I would stay every night, if you'd let me." Her eyes, once guarded, were now glassy with emotion. For the first time, she let herself really see him. He hadn't just helped. He hadn't just given. He had come and stayed, not just for Ava, but for her. And in that moment, standing in the dim hallway under flickering light, Maggie realized she was no longer afraid of what that meant. It was a Sunday morning in late January, and Maple Ridge was wrapped in a hush of new snow. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of sky that made the world feel like it was waiting for something. Jackson Cole was waiting too. He stood alone at the front of the same church where it had all started. First Grace on Cedar Hill. The candles were already lit, the pews polished, the winter chill kept at bay by the soft crackle of the old radiators lining the stone walls. The place was empty. By design, this wasn't about spectacle. This was about something sacred, something small, something that had begun with 5 whispered words from a little girl, and had changed everything. Outside, tires crunched softly in the snow. Moments later, the door creaked open. Maggie stepped in, her gloved hand gently wrapped around Ava's. She looked around, wary but curious. "Owen," she said, using his real name for once, not Mr. Snow Boots. "You said we were going to the park." He smiled softly. "We will, but first I wanted to show you something." Ava tugged on her mom's coat excitedly. "Come on, Mommy, it's a surprise." The warmth in Maggie's eyes flickered, but she let herself be led down the aisle. Halfway to the altar, she saw it, a single bouquet of white lilies resting on the front pew. The very same pew where she and Ava had sat on Christmas Eve when everything had changed. Her steps faltered. She turned to Jackson. He didn't speak. Instead, he took Ava's hand and gently knelt down on one knee. The child's breath caught in her throat. "Ava," he said, his voice trembling, "do you remember what you prayed for in this church?" She nodded. "I asked for a dad for Mommy." Jackson smiled, blinking back tears. "And ever since that night, you've changed my life." He took a small velvet box from his coat pocket, but didn't open it. "You didn't ask for toys or snow or magic. You asked for someone to love your mom. And I knew, right then, that I wanted to be that person." He looked into her wide, blinking eyes. "May I be your dad," he whispered, "not just today, but forever. For pancakes and snowball fights and bedtime stories and every scraped knee and birthday and school dance that's still ahead." Ava squealed and threw her arms around him. "Yes," she cried. "Yes, 1,000 yeses." Jackson hugged her tight, one hand, cradling the back of her head. Then he looked up. Maggie stood a few feet away, her mouth covered with trembling fingers. Tears welled in her eyes, unspoken words crashing in her chest. Jackson rose slowly, still holding Ava's hand, and and turned to face the woman who had never asked for saving, but who had taught him what it meant to give without expecting anything in return. "Maggie," he said, now standing tall but unguarded, "I came to this church broken. I had lost the only person who ever made this life make sense. I didn't come here looking for anything, but I found you." She took a breath, shaky and real. "I watched you carry everything. Grief, exhaustion, hope, motherhood, with more grace than I thought a person could bear. I watched you love Ava with everything you had left. I watched you give and never ask for a thing." His hand trembled slightly as he opened the velvet box. Inside was a ring, not large, not flashy, just elegant, just like her. "I don't want to rescue you, Maggie. You never needed rescuing. I just want to stand beside you. I want to build a life, not to erase the past, but to honor it and to create something new." He stepped closer. "I want to be the man Ava prayed for, and the partner you never thought you'd trust again." There was silence. Deep, full, holy. Ava, unable to contain herself, shouted, "Please, Mommy, say yes." Maggie let out a laugh through her tears. Messy, beautiful healing. She dropped to her knees beside them and cupped Jackson's face in her hands. "You already are," she whispered. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and as the church bells above began to chime, echoing over the snowy streets of Maple Ridge, the three of them, once strangers, now a family, held each other close. Outside, the world kept moving, unaware, but inside that small sanctuary, a prayer had been answered. A family had been born. The snow outside had begun to melt. Maple Ridge slowly exhaled winter's hold, and with it, a new kind of season took root in the lives of Maggie, Ava, and Jackson. Not just spring on the calendar, something deeper, a season of healing, of quiet joy, of becoming whole. They didn't rush into anything. There was no sudden move into a mansion, no press release, no whirlwind romance captured on camera. No, this was a love story built in small, tender layers. The kind of story that unfolds not with fanfare, but with intentional presence. Jackson didn't whisk them away. He simply showed up, every morning, with cinnamon bagels, mismatched socks for Ava that made her giggle, and that calm, steady smile Maggie had once thought was just for show. He helped paint the walls of their tiny apartment, soft greens and blues and pale yellows. He fixed the creaky cabinet, repaired the broken faucet, and when Ava got sick again, he brought over children's books and sat cross-legged on the floor for hours, reading in silly voices until she laughed herself to sleep. One night, Jackson brought dinner, homemade this time. "Well," he said, with a crooked grin, placing down a slightly overcooked casserole, "I Googled it." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "You Googled dinner?" He shrugged. "I wanted to try," and in that moment, sitting on the couch with mismatched plates and oversalted chicken, they laughed like they had never been hurt. In April, Jackson found a small house just a few blocks from the church. Nothing massive, 3 bedrooms, a tiny backyard, and a kitchen that got flooded with sunlight. He didn't pressure. He just showed her the listing. "I thought maybe we could build something here, together. You can pick the curtains. I'll pretend to care." Maggie smiled, that kind of half-laugh, half-sob smile that comes from finally feeling safe. They moved in that summer. Ava had her own room, painted lavender with glow-in-the-dark stars. Maggie claimed the sunroom as her reading nook. Jackson installed bookshelves for her birthday. Every morning they made coffee, sat on the front porch, watched Ava ride her bike up and down the street with her scarf trailing like a flag of victory. And slowly Maggie let go of the part of her that flinched when things went right. She didn't have to be suspicious of happiness anymore, because this time it was real. One evening in July, Ava sat cross-legged on the lawn, holding Mr. Buttons like a king. "Mommy," she said, "do you think God heard me right away, or did he take a little while?" Maggie looked down at her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think he heard you the second you said it," she said, "but sometimes the best answers take time." Ava nodded sagely. "Yeah, because Daddy had to find us." Jackson, watering the rose bushes nearby, froze. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Maggie's eyes met his across the yard, and in that quiet look, all the words that had ever needed saying were already there. By fall, the three of them had created a rhythm that felt like home. Sunday mornings were for church. Sunday afternoons for pancakes and puzzles. And Sunday nights, Ava's favorite, blanket forts and movie marathons. They didn't try to erase the past. They honored it. Maggie kept a photo of her late husband on the bookshelf, nestled beside a candle Jackson had once brought over during a storm. They never pretended there hadn't been loss. But now there was room for joy, too. Room for laughter. Room for new traditions. And then one day in early December, nearly a year after Ava's whispered Christmas Eve prayer, Jackson came home with a box tucked under his arm. Ava ran to him. "What's that?" He grinned. "Something for all of us." Inside the box were papers, brochures, and a small sign that read, "Angel of December, a foundation for single parents." Maggie's eyes widened. "You're starting a non-profit." "We," Jackson corrected. "You and me?" Inspired by a prayer fueled by a little girl and built on the strength of a woman who taught me what quiet courage looks like. He turned to Ava. "It's for all the moms who are tired and all the kids who hope, so they don't have to wait in silence." Ava clapped her hands. Maggie just blinked, overwhelmed. "Jackson, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." That night, as snow began to fall again, soft as memory, quiet as grace, they sat on the couch together, tangled in blankets, warm in every way that mattered. They had walked through fear, through pain, through the long night of waiting. And now they had come out the other side, together. The first snow of December fell heavier than expected. Flakes danced through the air like tiny miracles, blanketing the quiet streets of Maple Ridge with a soft hush. The town slowed under its weight. Shops closed, early headlights glowed a little dimmer, and chimney smoke curled like ribbons into the evening sky. Inside their small home on Willow Street, laughter echoed. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. Maggie stood at the counter frosting cupcakes while Christmas music hummed from a radio tucked under the window. She wore one of Jackson's oversized flannel shirts, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back in that casual way he secretly adored. Jackson sat on the living room floor, tangled in the tinsel and tape, with Ava, who was wrapping presents with all the precision of a 6-year-old. Glitter clung to the rug, the couch, and, unfortunately, Jackson's beard. "More tape," Ava shouted triumphantly. "We've already used half the roll," he laughed. "Then we need the other half," she said seriously, as if the fate of Christmas itself depended on it. Jackson handed her the dispenser with mock solemnity. "To the rescue, Captain Ava." Maggie peeked around the corner and smiled. The sight of them, her daughter and the man who had become her home, still hit her in quiet waves. Gratitude had taken permanent residence in her bones. Ava wore her lavender scarf everywhere now. Mr. Buttons, fully mended and still sporting his tiny ribbon, had become more than a stuffed bear. He was a symbol of resilience, of healing, of answered prayers. The house, though modest, radiated warmth, not just from the fire crackling in the hearth or the candles glowing in the windows, but from the life they had built inside it. A life of second chances, a life of belonging. That afternoon, Maggie turned to Ava and said, "We have a stop to make." "Where are we going?" Ava asked, clutching a small wrapped box with shiny blue paper. Maggie smiled. "You'll see." They bundled into coats and boots, then stepped outside, their boots crunching through the thick snow as they made their way down the street. Jackson followed close behind, hands in pockets, heart full. They walked in silence, the world softened by snow and memory, until the steeple of First Grace Church came into view. The sanctuary was quiet, lit only by the flicker of a few candles near the altar. No choir, no sermon, just stillness. Maggie led Ava to the very pew where nearly 1 year ago her daughter had whispered a prayer that would ripple across 3 lives. Ava looked around wide-eyed. "I remember this place," she said softly. "I thought you might," Maggie replied. They sat down together. For a moment no one spoke. Then Ava leaned forward, folded her small hands, and whispered toward the empty altar. "God, thank you. I got my daddy for Christmas." Maggie's eyes filled with tears, her throat tightening. Behind them, Jackson stepped quietly into the sanctuary. He didn't interrupt. He simply placed a hand on Maggie's shoulder and kissed the top of Ava's head. Later that night back at home, they gathered around the fireplace. Ava unwrapped her gift from Jackson, a handmade snow globe with 3 tiny figures inside, a little girl, a woman in a scarf, and a man with a beard covered in glitter. As she shook it and watched the snow swirl, she whispered, "It's us." Jackson pulled Maggie close. "Yeah," he said softly. "It is." Outside, the world was cold and quiet. But inside that little house, inside those three hearts, there was only warmth. The kind of warmth that comes from love, from grace, from knowing that even the quietest prayers can change everything. Some stories don't begin with fireworks. They begin with a whisper, with a weary heart, with a small girl in an oversized coat asking the universe for one simple, impossible thing. And somehow, miraculously, it answers. What started as a prayer in the back of a quiet church became a chain of moments. One man rediscovering compassion, one woman finding the strength to trust again, and one little girl believing in love so fiercely it made others believe too. Jackson didn't rescue them. He showed up. Maggie didn't fall into love. She walked into it, cautiously, bravely, one step at a time. And Ava, sweet Ava, never stopped reminding them both that family isn't always built by blood, but by choice. Together, they built something no money could buy. A life, a home, a promise. And in the end, they gave that gift forward. The Angel of December. Foundation would go on to change lives across the state, providing shelter, groceries, child care, and most of all, hope. Each grant handed out, each hand lifted was a ripple from that single whispered prayer. Because miracles don't always come in thundering winds or burning bushes. Sometimes they come through kindness left at a doorstep, a ribbon on an old teddy bear, a hand held quietly in the snow. So, if you're out there right now, wondering if the universe hears your quietest plea, it does. And someone, maybe someone you don't even know yet, is already on their way. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Because sometimes all it takes is one small act of love to change everything.